Marion pushed the stairwell door and stopped when she saw Thomas Reed's doorway gaping open, boxes stacked against the sill, and a folded municipal relocation notice pinned to the frame. Suspicion tightened her hands on the banister. She stepped forward and peered across the dim landing. A shoebox sat half open on the topmost crate. 2 children's drawings folded flat beneath a tin mug. Marion's first thought was practical. Who had packed these things, and why had they left the door unlatched? Her next thought was a sharper, colder question. Had someone come in to claim what they wanted while the neighborhood still slept? That suspicion pushed Marion down the stairs toward the flat with the slow, deliberate steps she kept for work she did by habit. She moved inside the doorway and ran a fingertip along the frame where the notice pressed into the wood. The paper rustled beneath her touch. The notice named Thomas' address, listed a consolidation deadline, and offered relocation payments. Marion folded the notice into her pocket without breaking her breath. She smelled boiled cabbage from a kettle still warming on a ring, and a single child's sock lay under the bench as if someone had meant to come back for it. Doubt tempered her suspicion then. Perhaps Thomas intended to return that night with a cart. Marion called Thomas and got no answer. Her voice was small in the hallway. In the first minutes, she catalogued the things she could see without moving crates. A chipped mug, a pair of wooden shoe soles, a hand-stitched handkerchief with initials M.R. She touched the initials and felt a small kinship to the neat handwriting, to the certainty of a name. Marion's work had always been to hold small certainties together, to tie a loose string around someone's habits so they could be read back. That evening she kept to that work. She closed Thomas' door gently and left the boxes where they were. She took one photograph with the iced, over-communal hall camera and walked toward the market square to find someone who might answer why the door had been left open. At first light the market smelled of stale bread and turned water. Wooden stalls sagged where cloth had been taken down. Marion found Lena by the crates, lifting a battered suitcase into a cart while Samir strapped a folded table on top. They did not look surprised to see her. Marion stopped and watched as Lena folded the suitcase lid down with a hand that did not shake. Lena, Marion, is Thomas leaving? Lena paused and looked at Marion by name, then at Samir loading a child's tricycle into the cart. People are leaving. Lena, Thomas signed. He left this morning, Marion. Why would he sign? Samir tightened a strap and answered. There was an offer. Money first, clearance later. Thomas, the flat smelled of damp. The offer paid enough for the fare and a place by the river. He took it. Lena's jaw set. He would at least tell me where he was going. He left too quickly. Marion noticed Lena's hands collused. Quick, the cut across a knuckle fresh. Marion's doubt shifted into quiet irritation. Why had Thomas left without telling friends? Why had the notice been pinned the way it was? Did anyone else sign? Samir folded his arms. Yes. 1 or 2. The inspector's going through the halls this week. Alvarez is doing the surveys. Inspector Alvarez. Marion repeated. The name tightened the air. When Alvarez came, things moved with paperwork and sealed doors. Marion had seen that pattern before. A man with a ledger met with a landholder. Then people signed lines they later could not erase. They argued a little in short sentences about who had the time to stay. Voices rose for a moment and snapped closed. We can lose the market. Lena, we need it here. We can stay with empty pockets. Samir replied. Marion kept her tone level. I will make a list. I will take the ledger from the hall and inventory what remains. Let me see soon what Thomas left. If there is a child's sock, it should be recorded. Her hands were steady as she spoke. The practical impulse, her old caretaking habit, led her to the communal hall where the ledger of communal items lived. The hall smelled of old paper and boiled linseed oil. Arthur was at a folding table, a pumiced ledger open in front of him, counting matches and pocketed spoons into neat piles. Marion nodded and crossed the room, her watch ticking soft on her wrist. Inspector Alvarez stood by the doorway, shoulders straight, hands in a coat that carried the faint grease smell of office stencils. He held a stamped envelope and a survey sheet. Keene sat with a rolled tobacco leaf. reading the list like a man choosing a field to sell. Marion, Arthur without looking up. You relate. The landing smelled of packing. Marion, Thomas left a notice. Alvarez looked up and his eyes slid across Marion with a measurement she disliked. We have consolidation schedules, he said. The landholder is moving to clear a number of buildings. It is efficient. Marion did not use the word injustice. She a single, precise question: who signed the agreements? Alvarez answered briskly, names are on file. If you wish to review them, you may come tomorrow. Arthur tapped the ledger in front of him. He pushed it toward Marion with both hands. We are cataloging what we can leave that people want to remember, he said. Small things. A child's shoe. A watch. We mark it for collection. Marion opened the ledger and found neat headings and columns. Most entries were inventories, crockery, books, a set of keys. The ink was a little smudged in places. As she read, a small coldness moved through her. The names were organized not by family but by building block. A column read consolidation planned, acceptance pending. That phrasing turned the departures into arrangements rather than choices. Marion's suspicion hardened into anger. You cannot list people like goods on a table. Her voice was low but held. Arthur looked up and met her eye. Marion, we are preserving items. There is no cruelty in organizing removal. Marion's mouth tightened. She leaned closer and pointed at a line with Thomas's name. This says voluntary, but his door is open and his box is here. Who left that notice? Alvarez tapped his watch. There are standard procedures. Mr. Keene is coordinating buyouts. Keene rolled the tobacco between his fingers and smiled without warmth. Buyouts make room for progress, he said. We pay for relocation. We do not force people out. Marion's hands found the ledger's edge. Her pulse thrummed in her throat. She wanted to argue every word, to make the ledger concede it had missiled them. Instead, she began to catalogue. Her fingers moved over pages, and she copied names into a small notebook she kept for these purposes. She jotted Thomas Reed, the notation about children's shoes, the address. When Arthur turned to help, he found a wrapped bundle tucked behind a stack of crates in the storage alcove. Marion heard him curse softly and followed the sound. The alcove was narrow and smelled of iron polish. He pried back a tarred cloth and found a small book, wrapped in oilcloth, and a child's leather shoe shoved flat beneath a box. Marion's hands moved without permission. She pulled the shoe free and then unwrapped the book. Inside the book were names and dates and small notes, entries written in different hands. There were payment notations and the shortened name of a landholding firm. There were also a child's scribble that read, for Mummy, and a pressed scrap of a concert program dated 5 years earlier. Marion turned the pages and felt the ledger's insistence. The entries linked names to payments and dates in a pattern that pulsed with intention. Departures were scheduled, incentives tracked, families listed alongside sums. This was hidden. Marion softly. Arthur, who wrapped this? Arthur's face went taut. I don't know. It wasn't here yesterday. Then someone put it here deliberately. Marion. The suspicion that had started on the landing changed into a clearer thought. Departures were coordinated. Her voice held no drama. It held demand. We need copies. We need names. Alvarez moved in, brisker now. You should not touch files left in storage. Protocol. Marion cut him off. Protocol does not save a child's shoe. If you will not let me copy, I will record names by hand. There was a silence of counter-position. Mitter. Keene cleared his throat. Marion, we are under no obligation to allow non-official copying. Marion looked at him and then at Arthur. Arthur's eyes shifted. She could see he did not want to quarrel. He let her take a copy. We will mark the original. Alvarez hesitated and then nodded. He spoke with the slow civility of a man confirming a small concession. 48 hours. You may catalogue selected items. Marion swallowed the quick surge of relief and turned the pages slowly, copying entries into her notebook. Each name she wrote tightened the ledger's pattern into a map she could follow. Outside the hall, someone shouted. Voices rose and a window rattled. Marion stopped and lifted her head. In the courtyard a cluster had formed. Neighbors had gathered, and one of them, Ernie, who ran the laundress's stall, was speaking loudly. Marion walked toward the courtyard and found townspeople circled against the low wall. Thomas Reed stood with his packed boxes near the cart, voice low. A man Marion did not know accused someone in the hall of clinging to ghosts. The accusation landed on Marion before she could defend herself. "Marion, you keep things to yourself," the man said. "You hold on to old papers and expect us to honor them. Why would we stay for that?" Thomas turned and said, "It is not for me to force anyone. The money will get my brother to work. I cannot refuse that." Ania's voice rose. "Thomas, tell us where you go." Done to leave with no word, Thomas looked at Marion and then away. "I told you." I had to take it. Marion felt the room close in, and the anger that had felt clear before collected into a hard, quiet ache. She set her jaw and held both hands on the ledger she now carried. "Thomas, if you go, leave a note where someone can find it. Tell Lena, tell Annie. Do not close the door and cut us off." Thomas sighed and looked at the boxes he had stacked. "I have nothing to promise you, Marion," he said. "But I will at least tell Lena." The man who had accused Marion started a tumbling argument about whether to accept the money. Voices punched the air with short lines. "Take it, stay for the future, who will remember the market." Marion put the ledger on her knee and watched faces move through hope, anger, and resignation. The communal argument shifted the focus. It was not only about Miss Keene's checkbook now, but about who would decide the neighborhood's fate. That night Marion returned to the hall with a list of items she intended to catalogue. She had copies of ledger lines and a pressed concert program. Arthur had found a small brass key tied with a frayed cord inside a pocketed drawer and handed it to her. The key was warm in her palm. She held it and remembered the way she had always used keys as markers, reminders of who belonged where. Her suspicion had become resolve. If the ledger and buyouts erased people's as names, she would keep what the ledger could not erase. She would hold rights. A knock came at the hall door. Inspector Alvarez and Mr. Keene entered with two men carrying a sealed box and a stamped clearance form. Alvarez placed the form on the table and set a leather case beside it. His manner did not change. "We have orders to collect keys and proceed with consolidation tomorrow." Marion's palms cooled. "You cannot take everything at once. Some items must be recorded. There are personal things in storage." Keene smiled and said, "We will remove items according to the inventory. Items of sentimental value can be claimed for a short period." Alvarez folded his hands. "We need the keys, Marion. We cannot leave buildings unlocked." Marion placed her small notebook on the table and slid it toward Alvarez. "I will make a list of the most crucial items. Give me until dawn. I will not delay you longer than necessary." Alvarez glanced at the ledger Arthur had set down, and then at the copy Marion had been making. He hesitated and then said, "We will allow you limited time to record. 48 hours as previously noted." The protest in Marion's chest eased slightly, but anger returned in a new shape. She wanted to force the ledger's truth into the daylight. She wanted the names and the children's scribbles to be known. "Will you at least allow me to keep a copy of the wrapped ledger I found in the alcove?" she asked. Arthur's hand hovered near the ledger. He looked at Marion. "It was tucked away." He said, "I did not put it there." Keene cocked his head as though weighing things in his hand. "That ledger may complicate straightforward removal. If it contains signed agreements, it is a landholder's record." Marion felt a sudden heat behind her eyes. She did not speak it as an idea. She showed it instead by closing her fingers around the brass key and letting her thumb rub the metal until the edges shone. Alvarez pushed the keys onto the table. He counted them. "We will take the keys after the inventories are complete." "We are under contract." Marion stood up and suddenly felt the ledger heavy like a stone in her arms. "If you take the keys tonight, I will not have time to record the objects that matter. Names will vanish. Please delay until dawn." Alvarez's jaw tightened. Mr. Keene's smile thinned. "We cannot delay too long. We are scheduled. We must keep moving." There was a pause. Arthur cleared his throat and said, "A compromise. Marion may catalogue a selection. We will allow her until dawn to copy the most important entries. Then keys will be handed over." Alvarez made a small sound and rested his palm on the leather case. 24 hours. Marion felt relief and something bitter at the same time. Her hope shifted into a slow acceptance. She agreed to the terms and began the work immediately. She moved through the hall, naming items aloud as she wrote them into a fresh book. The child's shoe, a blackened tea tin, a school photograph, a chipped marble. Each name was a sentence. Each sentence took up a moment of time that otherwise might have been swept away. At midnight something changed the rhythm. A heavy footfall at the end of the corridor stopped Marian's pen. Arthur whispered that someone had come to say good-bye and then left, and that Thomas Reed had returned to the doorway. Marian hurried across the hall and found Thomas leaning in the dark, his cart gone but a small sack slung over his shoulder. He looked tired. His face was raw with lack of sleep. Thomas, Marian, quietly, you returned. He shook his head. I had to. I forgot the tricycle. I couldn't leave it for the boy. Marian felt a sharp twist of something that wasn't pity. She felt a truth land into place. Thomas had not been simple about leaving. He had pulled at attachments and left them loose until the last possible hour. Did you sign because you wanted the money? She asked. Thomas hesitated and then said, it was not only the money. I cannot keep the flat in winter. The damp took my things. I thought I could start on the river. I am sorry I left without telling Lena. Marian kept her voice steady. If you leave, write a note for Lena. Leave an address. A man named Samir can take a message. Thomas ran a hand over his mouth. I will tell her. I promise. The promise was small and specific. Marian wrote his name down in the ledger under a note. Thomas promised to tell Lena. She watched him go and felt an emotion shift again. Suspicion softened to a fragile acceptance. She returned to the table and kept copying. At dawn a low mist lay across the street as Marian stepped into the corridor with the ledger's copy bound under her arm. She placed the brass key she had carried on the ledger's center page. Her fingers closed over the key as if to steady it against the ledger's weight. Arthur stood by the door, eyes tired, and Alvarez came bearing a stamped order. Keen waited by the cart. Alvarez counted the keys and then looked at Marian. Time is up. We will take those keys now, Marian answered without melodrama. Take what you must. But you agreed to allow me to record selected items. The copy is complete. I will hand you the originals earmarked for removal. Alvarez took the ledger's original with a pair of gloved hands, and then paused when Marian placed the brass key beside it. What is that? He asked. Marian's voice was low and steady. It is a caretaker's key. It marks who held the rituals of memory. It goes nowhere. Mr. Keen's hand closed over the ledger. Arthur came forward and touched the ledger's cover as if to confirm its weight. Alvarez signed the clearance form and slid it to Mir. Keen. The men exchanged a brief, businesslike look. Then Alvarez pushed the leather case toward Marian and said, we will release certain items for preservation. Take what you listed. The rest will be processed. Marian nodded and did not ask for more. She took a small cardboard box and placed into it the concert program, the child's shoe, the handkerchief, and the photographs she had copied. She wrapped the brass key in a square of oilcloth and slid it into her coat pocket. Her hands were steady. Her voice was a quiet instrument. Outside the hall, where the street opened into a pale morning, Thomas' cart had already gone. The market felt thinner. Marian lifted her box and the copy of the ledger and walked down the misted street. She placed the brass key on the ledger's center page, then pushed the book into a satchel and closed the clasp. She felt the ledger's pages like fingernails against her palm as she locked the satchel's buckle. A few neighbors were watching from thresholds. Lena crossed to Marian and touched the satchel briefly. Keep it safe, she said. If someone asks, tell them Arthur kept record. Tell them Thomas went by the river. Marian nodded. She put the small box into a neat cart she borrowed from Samir, and then stepped into the street with the ledger under her arm. She walked with slow, measured steps, the same rhythm she used while cataloging. Her shoulders were squared but not triumphant. The ledger's copy pressed at her side. The brass key in her pocket warmed against her skin. At the edge of the square, she placed the brass key on the sealed ledger and set the little box beside it. She stood there while the mist thinned into light. Marian's face did not change much. Only the set of her jaw told of the long hours and the choices made. Then she turned and walked away, the ledger's copy tucked tightly beneath her arm, and the packed box rolling behind her on the cart. She passed empty stoops and closed doors. She passed the lamplight and left it dwindling behind her. Her last action in the chapter was simple and definite. Marion stepped into the pale dawn, the satchel heavy with names and dates and a child's scrap of concert paper, and did not look back. The ledger's copy sat safe beneath her arm as she moved toward the river road and the uncertain town beyond. The brass key lay on the hall table where Arthur would keep it until someone needed to open what was left. The doors would be closed. The official forms would be stamped. Marion had accepted the compromise and carried away the record she could. The city emptied in practical increments, and Marion walked through that practical thinning with a small box of ordinary things and a ledger that reminded her who they had been. Marion stepped onto the stoop and yanked at the rope to Thomas Reed's handcart before he could push it past the threshold. Suspicion tightened her chest as crates scraped wood. A folded municipal relocation notice flapped against a crate. "Thomas, stop." "Marion, what are you doing with that cart?" Thomas paused, breath coming out in a cloud of dusk. He set a box down with careful fingers. "I'm leaving Marion," he said. "They gave me a slot. I signed this morning." His voice cut small against the cobbles. The central problem was immediate now. Residents were arranging their own exits, not running from fire or flood, but choosing relocation under polite schedules and tidy receipts. Suspicion sits in Marion like a weight, and it moved her feet. She had felt it before that night on the stairwell when she found Thomas' doorway open and boxes at the sill. She had seen a municipal notice folded to the front of a crate then too. The memory from the ledger, the shoebox half open, papers vertical in a hurry, pushed at her hands. She threaded her fingers on the banister and forced her voice steady. "Thomas, why now?" Thomas touched the paper pinned to a crate. "Jobs shifted," he said. "My workshop closed. They offered a voucher." "It's sensible." Marion, his jaw worked. He kept his eyes on the cart as if it could fall apart if he looked up. Marion's mouth hardened. She stepped between cart and street. Her aim was practical, to keep small ceremonies alive, to buy time. That practical anger soon became the engine behind everything she did in the night. A man in a dark overcoat appeared at the curb like he had been waiting. Elias moved with the slow, certain gait of someone carrying lists. He held a ledger tucked under his arm and a stack of polite papers. "Good evening, Elias. I'm Elias. Relocation office. I'm here to confirm allocations." He tipped a small cap in Marion's direction. His manner was courteous, but Marion heard the order in the ledger's spine. "Elias." Marion, pulling a key from her coat and letting it glint in the lamplight. "You have a delivery roster." "I have a ledger here too. I keep the building ledger. We need an exception for Sister May's clock." "She needs time." Her voice was low. She used the word need because bargaining began with small, concrete goods. Elias shifted the ledger. "The ledger is noted. Ms. Hale. We have allocations. Vouchers will cover transport. We can discuss heirlooms on a case basis." He read like a man reading a room and a rule book. When Marion pressed, his expression tightened by halves of a degree. The first emotion shift arrived in the curbside exchange. Marion's suspicion turned to sharp bargaining. She leaned on the cart inch by inch. Thomas flinched and then straightened, caught between the pull of a careful new life and the weight of what he left. "Thomas." "Marion, did you pack the child's drawings?" "The blue one with the sun." Her hand hovered over the crate. She named a specific object from the stairwell, details saved from the shoebox she had peered into earlier. Naming it made the stakes visible. Thomas' fingers brushed a corner of cardboard. "No," he said, "I left most things." "I'm not taking everything." He avoided Marion's face. "There's no room." Elias cleared his throat. "We can schedule an additional pickup," he said. "But the building is on the relocation list. People cannot keep extended occupation once assigned." He tapped the ledger. The sound was small and precise. When the formal tone hardened into procedure, Marion stepped back to the caretaker room to cross-check her ledger. The corridor smelled of damp paper and coal. She carried the heavy key on the frayed cord, its brass edge warm where her palm pressed. That motion, moving with keys and paper, was Marian's deliberate way to steady herself. Sister May arrived at the doorway while Marian set the ledger on the narrow table. The sister's coat had flour dust on the hem and a wool muff she clutched. Marian, Sister May, the Bennets left at dawn. They took the cradle and left the baby's blanket in the hallway. I had to fold it and put it in my parcel. Her voice had the quick, clipped rhythm of someone used to reporting small domestic crises. They left the cradle. Marian, fingers already opening the ledger. She found a penciled name and a date. When did they sign? Sister May took a breath. 3 weeks ago they asked for a delay. Today they handed the keys to a neighbor and walked to the van with only 2 boxes each. They wanted a smaller kitchen in the new place. Marian read the ledger aloud, following column heads with a finger. The ledger was a list of names and signatures and small notes, a record of dwellings and routines. Each entry was a visible decision. Reading it turned speculation into facts. Her suspicion shifted into a quieter, sharper grief. She could measure the thinning by signature. Jonas knocked at the door once and then came in with a small lamp and his knapsack. He was younger than most neighbors, his coat still smelling of solder. Marian, Jonas, there's a flat 2 doors down, lightly sealed. The latch isn't full shut. I thought we might see what's left. He set the lamp on the table with hands that trembled for reasons other than cold. Show me. Marian. Her voice was a command and a plea wrapped together. They moved quickly. The building demanded speed now because departures had a schedule. They forced the lightly locked door with a borrowed key and a careful angle. The flat yielded a quiet sound, paper against wood, and a narrow passage of light from street lamps. Inside, a child's drawing lay on the floor beneath the table, where a cup had been placed. A small brass clock sat on a shelf with the hands stopped at 7:10. Marian picked the drawing up with a fingertip, and Jonas reached for the clock with a gentleness that said what words could not. Is that Ellie's drawing? Jonas, yes, Marian. She ran a thumb across the pencil strokes, small pressure marks where a child had pressed down for a son. The detail anchored something in Marian. The departures were deliberate. People packed the objects that mattered and left the rest. Sister May came in behind them bearing a parcel of folded linens. They wrapped the blanket twice and left a note for Mrs. Bennett's sister. She reported they wrote instructions for the kettle. She set the linens down carefully, as if they might be fragile. The discovery rewired Marian's outrage into grief that had shape. It was no longer only abandonment. It was trade-offs made under pressure. Jonas spoke in a quick burst. They left a note about a job in the West End. Thomas, you have a note like that. Jonas looked at Thomas, who had followed them in, hands in his pockets. Thomas swallowed. I have an offer letter. Short-term work. I thought it was enough, he the word like a question, that revelation was the chapter's first twist. Departures were not panics but choices, and that changed Marian's argument. Her second emotion shift moved from anger to a slow, resigned determination to preserve something real. Elias returned that night with 2 more officials and a small team. They brought a stack of relocation vouchers and a polite trolley. The night had the organized rhythm of municipal work, forms, stamps, photographs of identification. Elias set the vouchers down on the lobby table and opened his ledger with a soft fingernail. Marian, Elias, the office will allow a short hold for communal items. We can note a retention list. We need cooperation to keep the schedule. His tone wanted to bridge Marian's pleas and the city's needs. Marian leaned forward. We want the ledger to stay, she said. This ledger records who lived where, who lent sugar, who watched each other's children. It matters. Her hands found the ledger on the table and flattened it. Elias folded his hands. We can scan pages for records, Mies. Hail, but physical custody must follow the relocation process. His language was procedural. Marian shifted, thinking of the shoebox half open on the stairwell from the last time she had checked Thomas' door. The bargaining tightened. Sister May placed a small bundle on the table. We need time for a simple memorial. Elias, 10 minutes. We will leave a page. We will pack a few heirlooms to stay for the caretaker's room. Elias considered. 3 minutes. He did not say no outright. He offered a number that meant his team stayed on schedule while granting a token concession. Marian saw the number like a hinge. They argued then in quick, clipped lines. Marian pressing for minutes, Elias citing allocations, Sister May reminding the group of the children's drawing. There were rapid turns of talk, 5 quick lines that read like a negotiation. Elias, listen, Marian, this is not personal. It is personal when you take the clock. We are not taking the clock. We will not be rushed to leave our rituals. A relocation worker moved some boxes at the threshold. His hands were steady, his face blank. Marian's third emotional shift reached a peak. Bargaining spun into a fierce need to keep a physical record, and she acted. When boxes began to slide into the van, Marian slipped the ledger into her coat with a motion practiced by decades of small thefts of preservation. Her fingers folded the covers tight. A worker lifted a heavy crate. The van's back door rattled. Elias turned at the sound of paper against cloth and found Marian's hand closing the ledger into her coat. Mins. Hail, Elias, voice carefully neutral. You cannot remove building property. His breath was close. The confrontation became sharp and public. Marian did not argue with adjectives. She pulled the coat closer and folded her posture like a shield. Elias, she said, if they must go, I will not let the ledger go with them. It is part of the building here. It belongs to the people who stayed. There was a stutter of movement. The relocation worker put the crate down. Thomas stepped forward. Hands empty, Marian, please. The exchange that followed became the chapter's climax. It unfolded in a quick series of actions and short-spoken lines. Elias reached for the coat. Marian pulled the ledger tighter. A voice came from the van, one of the workers speaking over his shoulder. Sir, we have manifest. Show me the manifest, Marian. Her voice had no flourish. It held only the fact that she believed the ledger mattered more than a printed list. Elias' jaw set. Hail, return the ledger now. This will be noted. He stepped closer. The worker began to open the van's door. Marian felt a shake in her fingers. She pictured the shoebox and the child's son. She made a decision that was not theatrically defiant but simple and precise. She pressed the ledger to her chest and stepped into the doorway to the lobby where the group gathered. Leave him be. Thomas suddenly to Elias. Let her keep it tonight. We'll sign the forms tomorrow. His voice had an edge like a small blade. The twist here was that a secondary character made a decisive move that altered the confrontation. Elias looked at Thomas and then at Marian. He read the ledger, the signatures, the small penciled notes. After a moment long enough to hold everyone's breath, he nodded once. 3 hours, he said. You have 3 hours to reconcile holdings and hand over any items to the official manifest. We will note the ledger's retention in the file. The bargaining ended half in order and half in concession. Marian's chest loosened a fraction. Her fourth emotional shift was not triumph, but a tired, watchful relief. She had kept the ledger for the night, partly by force and partly by Thomas' quick intervention. Back in the lobby, Marian persuaded a few neighbors to gather. Sister May brought a folded page torn from the ledger. Jonas placed the brass clock on a chair. Thomas set down a small shoebox with letters inside. The improvised memorial was spare, a stack of objects, a folded ledger page, a candle burned low in a jam jar. They did not speak much. When they did, their lines were short and practical. Elias allowed 3 hours. Sister May, we leave this page. Jonas, and the clock stays here tonight, Thomas added. They arranged the items with hands that moved like people setting down pieces to make an argument. The memorial was not theatrical. It was a set of choices. What to keep, what to record, what to hand over. The scene resolved immediate tension. The ledger stayed for a little while longer. After the van drove away and street sounds thinned, Marian retreated to the caretaker room with the ledger still in her coat. Her fingers trembled as she arranged the pages and smoothed the penciled names. She checked the shoebox note she had left earlier against the new manifest. The details matched. Dates, signatures, small marginalia. The ledger had saved ordinary facts that might otherwise blur. She closed the shutters to a quieter, empty street. The room smelled of coal smoke and damp paper. Marian set the brass key on top of the ledger and rested her palm over it. Her hands were steady now, but her shoulders kept a line of tightness. A final small event arrived. A folded page fell from the ledger where she had tucked it, sliding onto the floor with a soft whisper. Marian bent and picked it up. On it someone had written a child's name and a single sentence. We left the kettle by the window. The sentence was precise and ordinary. It was the smallest proof that people had not fled in panic. They had made decisions and left instructions. Marian sat and arranged the ledger pages into order. She counted signatures and dates and placed the folded page inside the front cover. She locked the door and slid the brass key onto its frayed cord. The chapter closed on a concrete action. Marian set the ledger on the shelf and turned the key once in the lock. Marian pushed the registry door and caught a clerk sliding a bound ledger onto a handcart, the cart already stamped with a removal tag. Suspicion tightened her fingers on the ledger's brass latch. She stepped forward before the clerk could finish. Elsie, Marian, loud enough to stop the clerk in mid-reach. The clerk froze with a stack of ledgers under her arm, paper dust settling into Marian's coat. Within those first seconds, Marian faced the conflict. The council had sent people to remove the city's records, and the records contained the names and small rituals of the neighborhood Marian had kept alive. She moved without ceremony, the heavy wool coat rubbing at her arms as she crossed the registry hall. Marian had been the building's practical memory for nearly 20 years. She knew the stair creaks, the places where soot gathered, the precise way the brass key fit the ledger case. Her watch ticked in its pale silver face. She kept habits because the habits made things legible. Elsie, what are you doing with those? She asked. Her voice was low, not dramatic, but it held an edge Marian had felt before when she encountered small wrongnesses in the city. Suspicion had grown from the open door at Thomas Reed's flat and the municipal notice tucked under a crate. Now it rose again, sharper. Elsie Park blinked and set the ledgers on the counter. She was in her municipal uniform, dark skirt, sensible shoes, and she had the clerk's tired economy in her shoulders. They used to clear them. Elsie answered, council order. Moved to the archive at the depot at first light. Her hands moved as if to tidy the papers, rather than to push them away. We can't keep everything here. Marian, the sentence landed as instruction and as shield. Marian stepped closer, palm on the counter, breath steady. She looked at the stamped tag on the cart. The removal tag had a bold printed line, final clearance. That line turned administrative instruction into a deadline. Marian's jaw tightened. She had watched neighbors pack and push away in the past weeks, but she had not expected the municipal machinery to take away the ledger itself. The ledger that listed the small rights she had closed every month. This ledger holds names, Marian. It holds who lit which lamp on Market Lane, and who signed for a child's parcel when the post halted. It is not merely paper. She did not say the word memory. She pointed at the ledger straps and rubbed the scar on her jaw without thinking. Elsie folded her hands. It is paper designated for transfer. The council gave instructions. We have a schedule and rotating sheets. She did not soften the bureaucratic cadence. I'm only following orders, Marian. That single line pushed Marian's suspicion into a new shape. Impatience edged with anger. Marian's feet shifted. She wanted answers, and she wanted the ledger left where she could perform the last entries. Before the exchange could stretch, a cart rattled at the registry doorway and Thomas Reed's voice rose from the stoop.
Elsie, that's mine!
Thomas called. He appeared hauling his handcart across the threshold, face flushed from exertion, a small chest tied fast with rope on top of his load. The chest had the gouged initials Tar. Marian had seen Thomas each morning with his handcart. She had yanked at the rope on his cart once before to ask questions. Now he straightened with a stubborn look. Thomas, Marian, Don T. Load that chest. She stepped between him and the cart. That chest contains neighborhood ritual lists. Thomas blinked at her, then at Elsie. They me to take what I could. Thomas, I have a cart. I have a place to go. I want to leave everything behind. He kept shifting his weight, fingers tightening on the cart's handle. The chest was small, but Marian could see the nicked varnish that meant it had been carried across thresholds many times. The object gave the argument weight. Elsie pushed back, sharper now. You can decide what stays, Thomas. The schedule lists everything. Her tone rose as if the registry's plaster ceilings were paying attention. If we get fined, we lose more than paperwork. Elsie turned the list over on the counter and pointed to a printed address. The council's words as if the paper itself were the law. Thomas' mouth pressed into a line. Elsie, leave my chest. I insist. He took a step to lift it and Elsie reached for the ledger instead, fingers closing on the binding. The action sparked the first confrontation of the night. Marion grabbed Elsie's wrist with both hands and pulled the ledger back. No, Marion, not that one. Her voice was quiet and controlled. But the motion was a physical claim that marked the ledger as something more than municipal property. They argued in short lines. Marion's hands were steady. Elsie spoke with official phrases. Thomas used the plain insistence of a man who had pushed carts for years. Marion, Elsie, you are not counsel. You can decide. Marion's reply came in 3 short sentences. I am the caretaker. I close the ledger. I record departures. That exchange revealed a new pressure. Marion's role, once informal habit, now clashed with formal removal. The tone shifted again when a young porter, Jory, ducked through a side door and held up a routing sheet. He was in his late 20s, narrow-shouldered and quick, and he had a damp cap look. Jory, handing the sheet to Elsie, there's a flat not on the list. 3rd floor, flat 5. I found footprints on the landing this morning. Fresh. Jory's arrival introduced an unexpected variable, and with it a second emotional shift in Marion. From anger toward the clerk to a sharp, practical curiosity. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Her attention snapped to the sheet. Elsie scanned the routing sheet, lips tightening. That address isn't on today's removal list, she said. Someone added it quietly in the morning batch. She looked up at Marion. Or it was overlooked. The possible oversight sat in the hall like a small sound. Marion read the flat number aloud. The name that followed made her stomach pull. She knew the tenant. Flat 5 belongs to Mrs. Sedgwick. Marion, she lives by herself and sometimes receives a man with a violin. She hasn't been to the market in weeks. The detail established that the city still held residents who might be resisting, and Marion felt obligation tighten into determination. Outside, the handcart wheels creaked as if they wanted to be moving. Thomas shifted the chest like a man weighing its value. Marion's decisions began to shift. Suspicion had pushed her forward. Irritation had sharpened into protectiveness. Now curiosity and duty pushed toward action. We should check the flat before they remove anything else. Marion, if someone is still there, we delay the clearance. Her sentence functioned as plan and demand. Elsie hesitated, then handed Marion a lamp. You have 15 minutes before the removal gang returns. Take Jory. Thomas stays with his cart. Her voice changed. The clerk's official posture cracked into a private concession. I can stop the council, Marion. I can delay this room for a little while. Marion heard the implication. Municipal power was a valve. Individuals controlled when it closed. They moved through the municipal corridors with the rhythm of people who had worked here for years. Marion's steps were measured. She rested her hand on the doorframe as they passed, an old habit that steadied her. They stopped at the reading alcove where bound volumes leaned like sleeping animals. Marion checked the spines. One loose page slipped from between volumes as she angled the lamplight. She picked it up and smoothed it between her fingers. The page carried a faded municipal promise in small, looped handwriting and a stamped seal. A caretaker's duty to remain until the last resident leaves. The paper was specific. It bound an action to Marion's position. The discovery shifted the emotional ground again. Suspicion turned to resolve. She read the clause aloud. The appointed local caretaker shall maintain registry custody and perform closing entries until the final resident's departure is recorded. Marion felt the letters anchor her. This isn't a suggestion, she said. It's a duty the council set down long ago. She folded the loose page into her pocket. The sentence turned the ledger from memory into a municipal binding and altered the choices available. Elsie watched her, face clearing into respect and worry. A new sound arrived, the registry porter whispering in the back office. Jory returned with his cap in hand. I spoke to a courier at the platform, he told Marion. He had the routing sheet folded in his pocket and his hands kept moving. Some residents are taking trains at dawn, but a few are slipping packages back into flats at night. Someone is hiding things. They may not want to leave everything behind. His words added a twist. Departures were not uniform evacuations. Some residents were resisting silently, keeping small valuables or rituals. Marion's plan needed to account for human stubbornness. They hurried toward the third-floor stairwell and paused at Thomas' landing. Tom's handcart struck the stair with a dull sound. Thomas looked at Marion. "If I can't keep that chest," he said, "I'll at least want to write the names down. Those names have my mother's handwriting on them. You know I can tea." He stopped, voice pinched. Thomas' argument was not about property. It was about the right to carry a part of home. Marion put a hand on his arm. "Thomas, calm yourself and speak plainly. What do you want to keep?" Her tone was direct, the caretaker addressing a neighbor. Thomas listed 3 items in short phrases: a child's wooden horse, a packet of sheet music, and the small chest. Each item named a concrete tie to the neighborhood's ordinary life and anchored the personal cost of leaving. Marion nodded and saw the ledger as a public record of these private attachments. At the landing for flat 5 they found the door cracked open and a thin light under the sill. Marion's hand rested on the brass key at her throat, the simple routine of a caretaker on full display. She pushed the door and stepped into a narrow room with a single chair and a bent violin case against the wall. The chair was empty, but a teacup sat on a saucer at the window, steam long gone, but a faint ring on the saucer still distinct. Fresh footprints dusted the threshold. Marion's reaction was concrete. She picked up the teacup and smelled the faint old tea and coal smoke. Her hands trembled only slightly as she set it down. The proximity of someone's recent presence changed the tempo. What had been bureaucratic became human. They called softly, "Mrs. Sedgwick." Marion's voice slid across the room. Footsteps above creaked, then stopped. A man's shadow crossed the hallway. He paused at the door but did not enter. "We heard music recently, Jory." His voice had a question in it. The pause stretched. Then from behind the door with a small gap, a voice answered, careful and small. "I am not ready to go yet." The reply turned the registry's scheduled removal into a moral problem rather than a legal one. Marion spoke plainly. "If you are here now, you can say so on record and delay removal for today." The offer was a practical solution with paperwork folded into it. The occupant came to the door. She was a woman Marion recognized, thin, with a scarf tied at her throat and spectacles smudged at the nose. "My name is Ains Sedgwick," she said. "The violinist visits at night. He leaves his bow in my hall." Her sentence was small but specific. Elsa looked at the routing sheet and then at the woman. "You must sign now if you wish to stay." "Elsie." The conversation required signatures, not speeches. Ains hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a pencil. She looked directly at Marion. "Will the ledger record my name?" she asked. Her gaze asked Marion for an assurance that her presence would have weight. "Marion, the ledger's name with the care one gives to a child's record." "Yes, Marion. I'll note you stayed tonight." The woman signed with shakier loops than Marion expected. That small act of marking a presence was the human scale that made the ledger matter. Back at the registry, the removal team shuffled equipment and debated routes. Elsie stood by the counter, moving between duty and caution. Marion settled at the reading alcove and opened the ledger. She brought the lamp close and began to write. Her hand paused over the pages. In the margins she had over years small ritual notes. Who had put flowers at the crossing, who rang the little bell at the back gate on market days. The act of writing was physical, scratch of nib, the lamp's heat on her fingers, the smell of coal and old paper. As she wrote, Thomas crowded near the counter, tightening his grip on the small chest. "Marion," he said, "these are our names in that book. If you hand it to them, who will read it later? Who will know we kept those nights?" His voice was immediate and raw. Marion's response came in 3 short sentences. "Keep what you can carry. I'll make a closing entry tonight. I'll record what people ask me to write." Her voice did not promise permanence. It promised an action she planned to perform. A tense exchange followed between Elsie and Thomas. "You took it, Elsie," pointing at the chest. You can keep council items on a private cart. Thomas shot back. I am keeping what is mine. The argument lengthened into 3 quick back and forth lines that sounded like the scrape of cart wheels. Marian inserted herself with a firm hand on Thomas's shoulder. Thomas, she said, this argument will not save the chest. Sign what you need recorded. Let the movers take the rest. Hold the chest on your lap if you must, but let us record the names first. The bargaining shifted Thomas's resistance toward action. He sat and wrote names on loose paper, while Marian transferred them into the ledger. Midway through the writing, Marian's lamp caught the edge of a folded page tucked in the ledger's binding. She recognized the handwriting, an old municipal clerk's hand, and her fingers found a note. A list of ritual closings that the caretaker should perform, including the rubbing of the ledger strap, the turning of the final page, and the leaving of the brass key on the counter. She read the instructions out loud when the last resident leaves. The caretaker shall perform the closing entry and leave the brass key upon the counter for the council's receipt. The clause made Marian's choice specific. She could either sign the relocation forms and leave with the council, or she could remain and perform the ritual with no legal protections. That choice tightened the night. Elsie stepped forward with relocation forms in hand. Marian, you can sign and accompany the consolidation team. We'll give you municipal assistance. You will be safe. The clerk's voice measured safety as a municipal commodity. Marian held the pen and looked at the official line ready for her signature. She felt a different shift inside, doubt lodged next to responsibility. Her hands hovered. You don't have to do it alone, Elsie added. This way you won't be left without help. The offer was concrete and tempting. Marian felt the ledger's weight under her palm. Her mouth tasted of coal and ink. She thought of the ledger's final note and of Thomas's chest. She also thought of the binder of addresses she had kept, the folded municipal promise in her pocket. She turned the page and found one more name. A clerk who had written, 20 years earlier, that the caretaker's duty carried a small municipal respect but no guarantee. The discovery fed Marian's suspicions about how the council valued local ritual. She looked up sharply. Elsie, she said, make a copy of the relocation list and mark any address that still reads as occupied tonight. The command shifted the dynamic. Marian was acting with municipal procedure rather than purely personal insistence. Before Elsie could reply, the registry door opened with a more forceful step. Movers returned earlier than expected, their boots stamping and the leather of their gloves creaking. They were efficient and practiced. They moved with stacking expertise. One of the movers reached for the ledger to place it onto the cart. Marian lunged forward and placed her hand over the binding. The physical act precipitated the chapter's climax. A short, sharp confrontation at the cart. Let go, said one mover. This is scheduled property. He reached for the ledger Marian held with both hands. Thomas stepped forward and tried to lift his chest at the same moment. Jory grabbed the mover's sleeve. The scene tightened into quick lines. Thomas, stop. Marian, Elsie, don't let them take that ledger. Elsie called to the mover. Hold on. We have a claim here. The mover grunted and tried to pull free. Marian pressed the ledger down on the counter. Her palms were steady, and the sound of paper creaking under force filled the hall. 6 lines of exchange followed, rapid, human. Let go of the book, ordered the mover. We have orders. Orders from who? Thomas shot back. From the council, the mover said. Council or not, you can just take personal things. Thomas retorted. This chest is mine. Thomas. So is that ledger for the last entries, Marian replied. The argument's pace rose. Each short sentence pushed the action forward and revealed who each person was through their choices. A sudden, unexpected interruption arrived when a messenger from the depot appeared at the door, breathless and mud on his boots. Stop, he said. He held up a stamped envelope. There is a routine correction. The depot needs to review ledgers on site before transfer. For a delay, his arrival shifted the contest entirely. An administrative pause trumped the mover's orders. The messenger's paper bore the depot's seal. Marian read it and watched the mover's shoulders slump. That small administrative twist changed the course of the night. It allowed Marion the space to do what she had decided earlier. She set the lamp on the ledger and opened to a clean page. Her handwriting moved deliberately. She recorded each departure she had witnessed and every name residents insisted should remain in the town's record. She wrote Thomas Reed's mother's name, Aidan Sedgwick's signature, and the list of ritual closings. Her script was plain. She did not editorialize. The act was ritual and record, and the ledger accepted each stroke in ink. When she reached the final lines, Marion performed the closing in the way the old note instructed. She rubbed the leather strap across the cover, set the brass key on the counter with a small metallic click, and folded a spare page into the binding with a short personal note. She wrote 3 sentences on the folded page. The date, the fact of the transfer delay, and a single line addressed to those who would later open the ledger, an instruction to treat the recorded names as living people, not file entries. The writing was brief, concrete, and purposeful. Thomas watched her with a kind of quiet that had not been there at the night's start. "Thank you, Marion," he said, voice low, "for writing them down." Marion nodded once. Jory leaned against the wall, wiping his cap, and Elsie tucked the relocation forms back into her bag but left them unsigned. The energy in the room had changed from confrontation to a contained acceptance. The mover wrapped the ledger in a cloth, set it back on the counter, and said, "We'll hold it here under supervision until the depot confirms," his tone meant. "Not ours to take tonight." Marion stood for a long breath, the ledger warm beneath her hands. She considered the relocation forms again. The municipal offer to leave with help was a tangible escape route. The caretaker clause was a specific, binding duty. The decision tightened and eased at once. She went to the small side desk and wrote 2 short letters. One to the council, explaining the ledger's recent entries and her decision to perform the closing act if the depot delayed removal. The other a folded note she would tuck in the binding as a private record for anyone who later opened the ledger. Before dawn, the movers left with crates and with a pile of rotting sheets. Thomas hitched his cart and looked at Marion. "Will you come with us?" he asked. His voice was not pleading, it was practical. The train in an hour. The question was concrete and immediate. Marion slipped the brass key into the pocket inside her coat, and then, in a deliberate motion, placed it on the counter. She left the key in a small circle of light. Elsie stepped forward and said, "If you stay, you will be without municipal pay. Are you certain?" Marion looked at the ledger, at Thomas' chest, at the piece of folded page in her pocket. Her face showed the pause of a person whose choices were built of repeated small responsibilities. "I will finish the closing entry," she said. "Then I will leave by first light. I will not make this into a fight." Her sentence contained a compromise. Duty fulfilled, then departure. They moved silently toward the platform as pale morning light creased the horizon. Marion carried a small packed bag. Thomas rolled his cart with the chest strapped on top, and Jory walked beside him carrying a small lantern. Elsie stood at the station's edge, the municipal forms folded in her hand. Marion stopped once on the platform and slipped the folded page into the ledger's binding, and then shut the book with a small, final click. She left the brass key on the counter and then turned away. On the platform, Marion took one last look at the city's slow chimneys and the emptying rows of tenements. No catastrophe had come. No fire or flood had forced departure. People had chosen to leave in small increments, and officials had moved to consolidate what remained. The city was intact but altered. Marion's face was lined with the night's work and with fatigue. Her steps were measured as she boarded the train and found a seat by the window. She set the small bag on her knees and smoothed the crease in her skirt with one hand. As the train pulled away, Marion watched the registry building recede. She held a quiet certainty in her chest that reflected a series of choices she had made. She had confronted movers, she had read the municipal clause, she had recorded names, and she had performed the closing ritual as the document required. The ledger would leave the building in time, but not before Marion had used it to fix a few ordinary lives into the record. At the first station beyond the city's limits, Marion rose, folded her folded page into her palm, and slipped off at dawn with a small, resolute step. She had left the brass key on the counter and the ledger with a note. The city's paperwork had been collected and would go to the depot, but the final entry remained hers. The train's rhythm took her away. The platform blurred into a line of posts and a single bench. Marion put the folded page into her pocket and walked down the platform. She carried the memory of the registry's small acts like a list she had chosen to complete. And she left with the physical motion of stepping onto the platform as the final, concrete beat.